Amen. So, where I wanted to go, I'm done in chapter 17 now. Not everything, most of the things I wanted us to pick up from chapter 17, I've accomplished, at least from my thinking. So if we're okay and there's not any major questions, I'd like to move on to a different chapter. Yep. Okay. So we're trying to track the first angel's message, and the next place we're going to see this message come up is chapter 19. So it's going to skip chapter 18, which is essentially the story or the biography of William Miller. So we're in chapter 19, and if you have your notes, you'll see that it begins on page 343, and the first mention of the first angel's message in that chapter is page 352, paragraph 2. So we're going to look at some verses in the chapter before we get to 352, paragraph 2. 343, paragraph 1. The work of God in the earth presents from age to age a striking similarity in every great reformation or religious movement. The principles of God's dealing with men are ever the same. The important movements of the present have their parallel in those of the past, and the experience of the church in former ages has lessons of great value for our own time. So we read 17 MR, which I think was Second Selected Messages 103, I think we read. I don't think I've got that to hand.
102?
Yep, I do have it to hand, I think. 102. Oh, it's 102, was it? Second Selected Messages 102. Yep, I'm just reading from 17MR 1.3. It's the same passage. Historical events showing the direct fulfillment of prophecy were set before the people, and the prophecy was seen to be a figurative delineation of events leading down to the close of this earth's history. So, connected to that passage that we read, this one we just read from GC 343 allows us to take this line of prophecy and then do what we enjoy doing, which is line upon line. Yeah. So can someone just walk us through this paragraph? Sister Rachel.
It's saying that in every great reformation or religious movement in this earth's history is that it's similar. God's working is ever the same. And the important events of the present we see in past history and in the experience of the church in the past, but it has great lessons of value for our time we have to learn from.
Sister Andrea?
That the work of God, as in His plan of saving the human race and using a designated people to do that, to present the message to the world, from every age or every every age, it's similar. There's similarities in every history. And that the way God deals with his people, it doesn't change. It's the same from line to line or from history to history. And that whatever's going on now in the present time, it has similarities from stuff that has been in the past or parallels. And that anything that has happened in the past means something for us. It's significant for our time and the day or age that which we live.
Did you tell me when you finished? Yeah.
That's it.
Brother Gregory?
History repeats.
Yeah. A bit more than that.
Okay. So the purpose of past histories is for us to learn from them, I guess, so we can avoid making mistakes of those of the past. I guess that would be the great value that we can get in them. And also God's response to human dealings aren't different.
Aren't different.
Correct.
Brother Gregory? Oh, sorry, Graham.
Graham?
Brother Graham, sorry.
So prophecy is a line of events that lead to the close of this earth's history. And we saw that historical events taking place upon this line show the direct fulfillment of this prophecy. And we're reapplying these historical events and making application.
Sister Bromwell?
Are we reading from selected messages 1 and 2?
GC 343.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to comment on that. I'm sorry.
What's that mean? Not prepared to comment on
I
it.
kept wondering why everybody's commenting on something that I didn't see. Okay.
I'll give you a second to read it.
Would you mind?
Yeah? I
Thank
didn't
you.
realise you went in the passage. Brother, Brother Maria.
Yeah. The principle of God's dealings are consistent.
A bit louder.
Principles of God's dealings, they're consistent, and we can see that, as it says, in every religious or in every reformation or religious movement in the ages past. We can track his dealings with men right throughout history. And also for our time, as we see his dealings with men in these different accounts, we can learn from them in making application in our time.
Okay. Brother Daniel?
The principles, the movements, and the experience.
What's the first word you say?
Principles. Principle.
Principles.
Principles. The movements and the experience of the church. They are things that happened in the past and are going to be repeated. So principles equals movements and equals experience of the church. Maybe.
Principles equals movement equals?
Experience of the church.
Okay. Sister Alyssa?
There have been many reformations and religious movements that reflect how God works from each generation or period of time. They have their application in the past and as well as the future. I'm done.
Huh? Can you remember the last bit you said? Each generation.
Each generation.
There's synonym.
In the past as
Each
well as the
generation or
future.
period of time. So I don't want to.
Oh, 1 second. You said what?
I thought you said in the past as it will be in the future, or in the past and in the future or something.
Has its application for
I'll just go with that. So, Sister Bronwyn.
In every generation or in every religious movement, the Lord has similarities, and we can take those similarities and apply them to the religious movement we're in right now. And learn lessons from those on how to deal with the experience we're having right now, based on all the ages past. He works the same way.
Okay. So we've had two comments that talk about generations, and the way you just said that, it seemed to me you were saying a generation is a reform movement, a great reformation or religious movement. Sorry. So, Brother Bob, it says, I know you want to say something, but I want to ask you a question. It says, the work of God in earth presents from age to age. What is age to age?
Different dispensations of the work that God's doing for man. I would think.
So, give me an example of what you mean by different dispensations.
I look at the way God has set up for people to communicate with Him and to worship Him. You know how in the beginning they came to the edge of the Garden of Eden to worship Him, and then after the flood, you know, Noah was building, you know, an altar, and then with Moses they built the sanctuary. I'm looking at it kind of in that light. And then obviously it gets to where the sanctuary was pointing forward to Christ, and then after Christ came, then we're looking at it's not just earthly, it's looking at what's going on in the heavenly and seeing that Jesus is you know, He was a sacrifice, then He's the high priest. And that at one point he went into the most holy place, and He's there.
Okay, so you're saying age to age means from this age to this age to this age.
You can look at it that way, but if you want to apply it to men, then I would say that it just has to do with periods of repetition. You see that there's a period of darkness, and then there's a light, and you can see that basically.
I just want to know what age to age means.
Oh, the repeat of the history. I'm saying of the three angels' messages is being given. It's through in history. Is how I would answer that question.
So you're saying this age is the same as the reformatory movement.
Yeah.
So the reformatory movement is this whole history?
No, there's more reform movements there than that. So I guess, I mean, I was looking at it from that angle to start with, but I see that you have to have the three angels' messages, even though they're in their most complete form, are have started in the Millerite movement and are going on and are going to finish up here at this Earth's history. But that pattern of the three angels' message can be seen in these from age to age. You can see it there because
I'm just trying to understand that you're saying that age is a reform movement or a religious movement. Is that what you're saying?
I guess that's what I'm saying if I had to just boil it down.
Because it seemed to be you were saying something different to begin with.
I was.
Okay. Brother James.
Same thing, yes. Brother Bob?
Yeah, what does it mean?
Um,
Age, what is that? What is this age that's being referred to?
Well, in context of what we're reading, it would seem that the Webster's Dictionary has one of two definitions. I mean, there's like 10 for age, but for what we're talking about, a century would be one definition of an age. Another definition would be the people who live at a particular period, like generations, I guess, like the others have said.
Say that the last one again.
The people who live at a particular period.
Okay, so if we're alive in 31 BC,
That would be an age.
so that's the age that's being referred to.
I don't know, but that, yeah, so it's one of those two.
The other one?
A century. I don't think that's how she's using it.
Mr. Ogilvie?
I'd say dispensation, based on the definition given. It like the Bronze Age, you can look at it from differentiatings of dispensation to dispensation.
So the work of God in the earth presents from one age to another age a striking similarity in every great reformation. So what does that mean then if you're going to make it a dispensation?
You can see the similarities, like if I were to use dispensation, right, and as you have drawn it on the board, there are similarities between when there were altars, when there was a sanctuary. It's the same repetition, just bringing in maybe different aspects, but it's a repetition of the same principle.
Okay, then what about the Great Reformation?
Each dispensation has a reformation, a period of reformation.
Singular. Just one.
One reformation.
Or lots of them.
I don't know.
Theodore?
Well, an age to age is kind of similar to generation from generation to generation. I don't know how you would define what one age is. Even one generation can vary.
So if we go with generation,
Yeah.
from one generation to another generation, there's a striking similarity in every great religious movement.
Yeah.
So there's one religious movement, maybe not in every single generation,
Yeah.
but in that generation there's one religious movement.
Reformatory movement. So if there's a
Comes and
reformatory
goes.
movement,
Then you'll have another generation.
yeah, so each generation doesn't have its own reformatory movement.
It doesn't?
Well, I don't know. It depends what you define as a generation. I mean, some generations, they're in periods of darkness. So
Yeah,
they're-
some wouldn't,
Yeah.
but the ones that do, I just
Yeah.
want to know how people are reading that. So you're reading an age is the history of where you're going to have one religious movement.
Yes. That they're, and these are all connected together. So each of these, each age, it could be that we look at each age as representing the way that I would look at it, the way that I understand it, whether that's what she means in this context, is that there's always a period of darkness and then there's a reform movement. And that to me would represent an age. It would represent not necessarily a generation, But the expression from age to age usually means similar to from generation to generation. Not that every generation has, reformatory movement. Right. But
So-
it's just a,
So you don't see it this way? Like,
well, a
all-
dispensation, because those particular dispensations, they do have reform lines attached to them.
But there's more reform.
But there's more reform lines than just those dispensations of the sanctuary of worship.
There's more,
There's more reform lines that exist, or
for
reformatory
instance,
movements.
in this one, as an example, there'd be a number of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you're not reading age to age, dispensation to dispensation.
No,
You're reading
I'm
it
not.
generation to generation.
Yeah, and it's a general term, usually, because it's an expression. So, I mean, why she chose from age to age instead of from generation to generation. Maybe that an age is bigger than a generation, but it's a similar type of expression. It's not something that, where you know what an age is, or what particularly a generation is, because it can vary.
So you're picking up from Brother James's second definition. Is that right? Second one that you gave us?
First.
First or I thought it was the second. Read both of them.
Not a century.
So the first one seemed to be just like, even if it's not literally a century, this long period of time.
It said a century,
Specifically.
100 years is what it
Okay.
said specifically.
And the second definition.
It says the people who live at a particular period.
So
That's the way I would take it. Like, I didn't hear him say that before.
So that's how specifically Sister Alyssa and Sister Bronwyn were picking up this concept that this age to age is essentially this religious movement that's going to occur. There's a religious movement going to occur in one age and then another age. Yeah? Sister Alyssa?
I think she defines it in Acts of the Apostles. She says, from age to age through successive generations. That is 12.1.
During the ages of spiritual darkness, the Church of God has been a city set on a hill. From age to age, through successive generations, the pure doctrines of heaven have been unfolding within its borders. Enfeebled and defective as it may appear, the Church is the one object upon which God bestows, in a special sense, his supreme regard. It is the theatre of his grace in which he delights to reveal his power to transform hearts. So you've got proof text there. I think we can say that's a proof text. From age to age, through successive generations. Yeah? Age to age is generation to generation. We're okay with that?
Can add to that.
Yep.
Christ Object Lessons 127.
Can't hear back here.
Christ Object
Lessons 127.
Point 4.
Christ Object Lessons 127. Things new, things old. In every age, there is a new development of truth, a message of God to the people of that generation. The old truths are essential. New truth is not independent of the old, but an unfolding of it. It is only as the old truths are understood that we can comprehend the new. When Christ desired to open to his disciples the truth of his resurrection, he began at Moses and all the prophets and expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Okay, so I'll just go back to the beginning. In every age there is a new development of truth, a message of God to the people of that generation. So in any one age, it's talking to the people of that generation, that age. Okay with that? So that was COL 127.4 and Acts of the Apostles 12.1. So coming back to our passage, the work of God in the earth presents in each generation a striking similarity in every great reformation or religious movement. So are we okay, or what do we think that a great reformation is a religious movement? Is that what this religious movement is? It's a great reformation. Yeah? So, the purpose of this religious movement is what?
Make a great reformation.
Yeah, so people can reform their behaviour. So, this is what was mentioned a moment ago. If you go to each generation, and maybe we wouldn't specifically say every single generation, you know, literally, but there's going to be this reformation. We're going through this in a little bit of detail because I want us to be sure that what this movement is being created on, which is reform lines, actually has quite a solid foundation. It's, you know, it's not something that we made up or guessed, or we didn't just go to Isaiah 28 and pick up line upon line, and you know that's all there is to it. And we just, because you know when we do line upon line, take it from Isaiah 8, it's a spin on the word. It's not literally, you know, the way we create lines in the way. That's not exactly what Isaiah is talking about. It's a lot stronger than just that. So that's why we're taking a bit more time to do that. Brother Larry and Brother Bob.
There's a good quote in Patriarchs and Prophets 373.2 that emphasizes the quote back in GC. And it's the
PP 372.
Paragraph 2, and it's the first full sentence.
PP 372 paragraph 2.
No, 373 paragraph 2.
God's work is the same in all time, although there are different degrees of development and different manifestations of his power to meet the wants of men in the different ages. Beginning with the first gospel promise and coming down through the patriarchal and Jewish ages, and even to the present time, there has been a gradual unfolding of the purposes of God in the plan of redemption. So in this one, where it uses ages, it uses it in a dispensational fashion. The patriarchal dispensation, the Jewish dispensation, uses age in a slightly different way. In the second sentence, in the first one, God's work is the same in all time, although there are different degrees of development and different manifestations of his power to meet the wants of men in the different ages. So it seems to me the ages that are being used here is not in the same way that we just read from those two texts. So it does go to show that it's contextual what age means. It could be dispensational, which is what you said at the very beginning. Could be that, or it could be specifically a generation. So we'd have to decide which one it was in the GC quote. Brother Bob.
One of the very first principles I ever learned when I started to study the Bible was the principle that God's word is the same yesterday, today, and forever, that he never changes. I can't think of a more foundational principle than that one. And that's brought out in this first paragraph as well, that, you know, his dealings with men's ever the same. He doesn't change, and that he's no respecter of persons, okay? And so we have to, there's great comfort in knowing that. And when we think about how there's parallels, and we're talking about the present versus the past and how important the past is to us, I was taken to a verse in 1 Corinthians 10:11, which says, "Now all these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come." So that's just a summary of some of the thoughts that are in this paragraph.
One thing that we are becoming increasingly aware of, and we need to take note of, that when we think about these concepts of God's dealing with men is ever the same, and we talk about line upon line, parable of the 10 virgins has been and will be fulfilled to the very letter, all of those statements are true in and of themselves, but there are differences in these reform lines. And if you don't see the differences, you can get caught unawares. So, you know, a simple overview would be, in the history of Moses, God is trying to create a church. Yeah, this scattered group of people, he's trying to form them into this body. And by the time you get to the time of Christ, what he's about to do is destroy that same church. So there's the creation of a church and the destruction of a church. And you see the same thing for modern Israel. The Millerite history is a line of trying to build a people, and in our history these people are about to be wiped away and destroyed. So there are key differences between those histories that if we don't see, we can get tripped up. Another example would be the Millerite line is essentially a line of failure. They just make mistakes after mistakes after mistakes, even in their theology. And our line really is a line of success, even though you may think otherwise after listening to some of my comments. But our line really is a line of success, and theirs is a line of failure. Because if our line wasn't a line of success, we'd die and our children would take over. So if we have this belief that we are the final generation, then our line must be the line of success. Whereas the Millerites, when you look back by definition, it was a line of failure because they never did the job that they were supposed to do. Christ was supposed to come back in that generation, which is why we've had so many problems with Matthew 24. From verse 29, 30 and onwards, we don't know what to do with that cloud. Yeah, we wanted to make it Daniel 7 instead of Revelation 1 because we want to kind of tuck in Millerite history. So because of their failure, that we then have to re-examine how we're going to approach Matthew 13. Whether we're going to contain it as the Millerite line and then superimpose or parallel our line on top of that one, because you can do that, or you can just take it as a singular line, progressive line, starting with the Millerite history all the way into our history. So have we understood what I just said? So we know that these signs here, as we read in chapter 17, it's 1780 that's the premier sign. What makes it premier is 1773, and this begins to awaken God's people and prepare them for 1798. So you have 1798, and then you could go to 1844, and you'd end up doing Daniel 7:13, which I've explained the problems that you get into when you do that. And if that was the case, then we have an option. We either say, well, the same verses can describe our history, and for this purpose I'll just bring Revelation chapter 1 here. So it's these two clouds, and that's what the chart that the movement has put out, that's what this chart looks like basically. People are familiar with that's how that chart's laid out. Yeah. And there's this little section here, and it says this is April and this is the Sunday law. So we can either do it this way and make these two parallel histories in the verse, or you do this 1798 to Revelation 1, and here's this cloud, and you make it this line. So this is what the line is actually teaching, but because of this anomaly, the failure of the Millerite history, the generation should not have passed. We have to look at this in a more detailed fashion. Does that make sense?
I got a question.
Yeah.
Why is it Revelation 1 and not Daniel 12:1?
Doesn't talk about clouds in there.
Oh, the cloud?
Yeah, he's going with clouds.
Just picking up from 1:7, behold he cometh with clouds.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I think it's 24:30. Matthew, sorry. Matthew 24:30. They shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven.
The fail wasn't after the Millerites, because Millerites says they fulfill their job, and
She was having a happy day then when she said that.
no, it had to have first the investigate judgment. So Jesus couldn't come even if they were faithful.
Couldn't come
in October 22.
Okay, so you remember when we did that line, that's why I'm saying this chart isn't lining things up correctly.
Okay.
Yeah? That's how the chart was laid, and I just paralleled the clouds. But this event, October 22nd, is not the second coming.
Yes.
If they had got their history correct, it still wouldn't have been that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes. So that's why I said that if we were going to do this, you'd have to have Daniel 7 here, and you'd have to have Revelation 1 here, and you'd have 2 clouds. Because they're not the same way mark. Even if they've got everything correct, it's not the same way mark. Back to GC 343. So we could pick up this age to age either as dispensational or intergenerational. So I think we've all agreed that we're going to look at this as from generation to generation, which means this statement, the work of God in the earth presents from age to age, from one generation to another, a striking similarity in all the great Reformation or religious movements. So, let me redo this. So this is a Reformation, and the reason why you need to reform is because God's people have sinned, and we call this sin period of darkness or the mystery of iniquity. So we can see all of that just in this one sentence. The principles of God's dealing with men are ever the same. The important movements of the present have their parallel in those of the past, and the experience of the church in former ages has lessons of great value for our own time. What's that last sentence saying? Before we see what it's saying, what is the structure of that sentence? Brother Larry.
Structure would be present.
Okay, so I've got present,
past,
and what's all that?
What's all that? That's beginning from the end.
Not what it means.
Oh.
What is present and past?
Of important movements.
So this is movements. Then what?
And then we have experiences, ages, and our time. Or ages in our time.
So I'm going to put past
Uh-huh.
and
Past. And then former
so
ages.
It says former. Former is past.
For our time.
And that is present.
Present.
It says our time. And what's that referring to?
Referring to church.
So we can see we've got a chiasm on there.
Yeah.
On the right. The important movements of the present have their parallel in the movements of the past, and the experience of the church in the past has great lessons for the church in the present. So if we can see that pattern there, first of all, you have this reform movement that goes on in each generation, so we've picked that up, and the definition of reform is to people who have backslidden to get their lives back in order, and we've represented that by sin or darkness. Then we've seen this sentence where she seems to be giving us this chiastic structure there. So it says the important movements of the present have their parallel in the past and the experience of the church. So what are these movements? And what is the church?
Well, I think when we were reading that first sentence, and it talked about in every great Reformation or religious movement, we were reading that as the same thing. Her just telling us a great Reformation is the religious movement. But we could see maybe in this, as we go on, we could see that the Great Reformation would refer to those movements, and the religious movement would refer to the church because of the religious part. They're both movements, they're both reformations, but one is just other types of reformations that aren't necessarily religious movements.
Okay,
That's what I'm thinking is possible. I don't know if that's...
Okay, well,
I explained it well.
I'm going to explain that, break it down a little bit more.
Okay.
First we want to notice, it says the important movements of the present. So it mentions the word movement, and the word religious movement or word movement was in the first sentence. So is this movement the same movement that's referred to back then? Because initially we said in every great Reformation or religious movement, the word or seems to say they're just different ways of explaining the same thing. If we all agree with that, it's just they're synonyms. And now it says the important movements of the present. So are these movements of the present religious movements or different kind of movements? So we've made that connection. So if you go back and suggest what you're saying.
That's what I don't know. I don't know if those important, if she's in a sense repeating again that they're the same thing, or if she's talking about two different things. I'm not sure of that.
Okay, so if they were different things, then these movements are not the religious movements.
Right.
They're other movements.
Yes.
And
the experience of the church would be the religious movements. It would parallel that.
Anyone else? Robert Daniel.
I agree with him. I have never read like this, but maybe.
Okay, what do you agree on?
That this can be another movement, not the religious movement.
Okay.
It's interesting that talks principles of God's dealing with man. So it's God's people, then important movements, and then the experience of the church. So it seems they're talking about internal and external. You have the internal principles of God's dealing with man, and important movements, maybe external, and the experience of the church, internal. So I don't know, suggesting, I know you don't want to go with application, but maybe the principles of God can be the seals, the important movements, the trumpets, and the experience of the churches of Revelation. I don't know, I'm just suggesting.
Okay, why have you made those men religious men? The principles of God's dealing with religious men, not just all men.
Yeah, I didn't pay attention for that.
I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just asking. Sister Andrea.
Initially, when I read this, I'm thinking when it says the important movements of the present, I'm not necessarily thinking it's referring to the religious movement, but more like the actions or activities of the present. That's what at least that word presents to me.
Okay, so I don't know if we all agree that we can see this structure. If it's there, I think it is, obviously I wouldn't put it on, I don't know if someone else noticed it. What would that be teaching us? What's the purpose of creating the structure? What is that structure, what is it trying to show us, Sister Olivine?
The lessons that God wants us to learn.
I don't know what that might answer means, sorry. Obviously he wants us to learn something, but what? What does he want us to learn by noticing that we have a chiasm?
That he's dealing with the same present, past, movement equal church. Same thing, he's dealing with the same thing, he's just repeating and enlarging on. He's just repeating himself basically.
Okay, so you're saying this is teaching you that the movement equals the church, which is different to what Sister Andrea and Brother Daniel were saying, that it's teaching them that they're different.
Yes.
But I see you had Brother James.
Give me another minute or two.
Okay. Brother Nathan.
I might consider that point that it could be talking about other events. If I'm looking at that structure that you just set up, maybe I might say that a movement has to realize what they are by looking at the past, and then by looking at the past, they realize that they're a church. That's probably not the best way to say it, but yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so you'll be looking at, as Sister Olivine is, the movement is the church. If I understood you correctly.
I don't know. I can't express my thoughts at this time.
Brother Theodore.
Well, dealing with the chiasms, we can look at a lot of different chiasms, such as Leah and Rachel, plenty and famine, paganism, papalism, Canaan, Egypt. Usually a chiasm shows that there's things that are parallel.
One second.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do 25-20.
Yeah, the 2:12:60s.
Paganism and paganism.
Yeah.
Brother Mario, is that chiasm? That chiastic structure?
It's like a mirror.
Sorry?
It's like a mirror.
Like a mirror. So you say yes? The only reason I ask is, I don't know if we need more detail to show it to be a chiasm, or if it's just a chiasm as it's just drawn there. But I don't think normally most people say, oh, that looks like a chiasm to me. Most people wouldn't consider it to be such.
Just by itself.
So carry on.
So you'd have to have the 1260 in there, and you can show that you can lay them over top of each other, so they parallel each other.
So you've got 1260s.
Yeah. They're both periods of persecution. And there's a transition that occurs, so the center of that chiasm has a transition point attached to it. You know, so there's lots of different features that you could bring out about the two 1260s.
All I want us to consider is normally we don't think of that as a chiasm.
No, we don't.
That's why I'm labouring the point, because we don't look at that as a chiasm. We just say two 1260s, 25-20. It's all fine.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we've got this midpoint, midway, and we wouldn't go to the 70th week and think of that as being a chiasm. Often, we might, now that I mention it, if we did 27, 31, and 34, we'd say, oh look, there's a chiasm you'd say, look like a chiasm to me, just because it's got these 3.5s and it's equal. It's not a chiasm as we would normally think. So just want us to see that. Because it's all about persecution. There's no change. It's persecution all the way through. This is the 70th week, there's no change. But there are some things that are different. This is the Christ's history and this is the disciples' history. Paganism, papalism. Sister Bromley.
I'm probably wrong, I'm going to regret saying this, but in my mind when I see a chiastic structure, there has to be at least 2 elements or more for it to be chiastic. Like, you would have, it can't just be a book hinge for me. And the 2 1260s are just look like a book that you're closing it, but you would have to have other portions of it that fold in on each other to be chiastic in structure in my mind.
Okay, so you're saying that this one has to look exactly the same or look like this?
Multiple structures on the other sides or somewhere that fold on each other. Yeah.
Okay, so if you didn't have that, it wouldn't be enough.
That's what I think. Is that wrong?
Sister Olivia?
I view it as how Bronwyn sees it. I wouldn't just, like when Brother Theodore starts explaining whatever, then he's painting a picture, but just looking at it as you wrote it, no, I've never looked at it as a chiasm. So it, as she says, there has to be, for me, multiple things folding into each other.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to take this out, and all of this. Is that a chiasm as it stands?
So if you just had like 2 periods of, let's not use this one, let's just use Leah and Rachel. 7 years and 7 years. I mean, there's not as much structure in that one. I have a hard time removing all that other structure from the other one. So I mean, he works for 7 years for each of them. There's nothing that I can think that particularly, other than there's some events that happen in the middle that tie them together. They're just periods of 7 years. On the surface, they wouldn't really be a chiasm. You can't just say 7 years happened and this occurred, and 7 years happened and something else occurred. So that's a chiasm. You have to have a connection that ties those 2 together. And so there is more to this one as well that makes it a chiasm. But just looking at it, if somebody was just looking at...
Is that chiasm as it is?
No.
That's what I'm asking you.
No, not as it is.
So that as it is isn't a chiasm?
No, if you don't know about all the other things that happen at the beginning and the ends and the
So,
transitions.
To make this a chiasm, you have to have this equal to this.
Or the opposite. So not even just equal, they can be related events. So
there's got to be some kind of connection.
Yeah, there's a connection. They go into captivity, they're released from captivity. You know, something happens at the beginning when Hoshea is taken captive that's paralleled at the end when the Pope is taken captive. Right? So, yeah, so there has to be some kind of structure that makes it a chiasm.
Okay, so when you say this is a chiasm, it's not just enough that you have a midpoint and you can hinge.
Right. There's things at the beginning and end.
There has to be another connection. Okay.
I'm just ready to comment on the bottom.
Okay, so so before you do that, Brother Theodore's going to mention something about chiasms, and you gave that one example that I picked up on. And what was the point you were making?
Dealing with chiasms is that there are also 2 different things in the 2 halves that, you know, you wouldn't have a chiasm just that had 1,260 years of paganism, 1,260 years of paganism. When you look at this bottom one, the fact that you have this chiasm, which is present, past, past, present, that's a chiasm, right? We'd all agree on that. It would suggest then that they're 2 different things, not the same thing, based on all the other chiasms I've seen, because there is always a transition in every chiasm that they're related to each other, but they're different. The first part and the second part are different.
So I'll go back to 27, 31, 34, and this runs all the way through to singular history to begin with.
To confirming the covenant.
So it's one history, and whatever you're doing here saving people. It's
Yeah.
the same thing you're doing here, saving people. You're persecuting and you're persecuting.
Yeah.
But there's a difference, because this is Christ doing the work and this is the church doing
Yeah.
the work. So there are differences between them.
Yeah.
So if I'm picking up what you're saying, paganism isn't paganism, they're totally different entities,
Mhm.
but the theme that runs through can be the same theme.
Right.
It's a singular dispensation
Mhm.
of persecution, but there are differences between them.
Mhm.
So when you set up a structure, you wouldn't normally do that. Because if you're going to do that, then... Sorry?
Nice, it means not equal.
Yeah, so if you're going to make the same, can you make it the same?
Well, same but different. So they're both movements, so they have to be both the same type of thing, but one could be refer to things that aren't religious in particular. So there are events that happen in the Bible that aren't really religious movements, but they represent reform lines.
I've got the fact that they can be different.
Yeah.
Can they ever be the same?
Identical.
Chiasm. So
They
have
could.
a think, have a think about that, Brother Jay.
I don't know that that's I don't know if that's chiasm or not. It looks like it's a chiastic structure, but I think it's more repeat and enlarge. I don't think movement in church is correct. I think a couple of very key words are being left off. It says the important movements, and it says the experience of the church. So both of the things have to do with what's going on, not necessarily that what looks like an entity marked. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm open to if you don't think this is correct.
I think what it's talking about is important movements, and the present and the past is correct, and experience of the church, past and present. So I think it's just repeating it and enlarging it.
Okay, so that's okay. Ask your question.
The movement is an experience that the church has. And she is talking about both Millerite time, the movement of the Millerites, as well as the church that she's in. Because this is 1883-ish, or even after 1850. Well, I don't know if I've proved this with early writing, so for sure 82 to...
Can I just stop you for a second?
Please.
Because
Yeah.
the additional information doesn't help, at least me. If it doesn't help me, it probably doesn't help other people.
So she's speaking about the Millerite movement, but she's also speaking about the church. But the church is formed through the movement. So that's where I see both camps. Some people trying to equate the two, and others seeing them as separate and distinct.
If I pick you up, you say the movement equals the experience of the church. I think that's the correct definition.
So the movement, yeah, but in the Millerite time, it also formed the church.
Yeah, I'm just saying, is that definition correct?
For now.
Because
yeah.
it's not just the Millerite movement. You've got to make it work in every movement, in every age.
Yeah. Because even the Reformation, that was the movement of a group of people, a group of religious people in churches, and they were having experiences. It was separate from the church itself.
So the movement is the experience not of the church but of people. Okay, have a think. One second, Brother Daniel. So the reason why I was asking the question to Brother Theodore is we've got a chiastic structure here, perhaps. We're familiar with repeat and enlarge. So you say something and then you say the same thing again. And when you say it the second time, you don't say the same words. Because if you said woe and you said woe, you're repeating but you're not enlarging. Because there's no enlargement of information. My understanding is enlargement means extra information or added information. So this would just be a repeat. So I won't give an example of repeat and enlarge, but repeat and enlarge means you say the same thing but you give added information. So what's the difference between a repeat and enlarge and a chiastic structure? Brother Nathan. If you're answering my question or you're asking another question?
I think I'm gonna answer it. I'm gonna try to answer it.
Okay.
If I wanted to draw it on the board, since you kind of put that equal sign, I'm gonna use mathematical terms, I guess. So if I wanted to draw a chiastic structure in mathematical terms, I put a 7. I'm not sure what's in between them. Put the equal sign, and then I put -7. -7.
Oh,
so
okay.
in a sense they are the same, but they're the same only if you have both of them. Like, does that make sense? Like they equal 0. They're the same when they come together. I don't know if that answers.
That's a chiasm or repeat and enlarge?
That's a chiasm.
Is a chiasm a repeat and enlarge? Solve?
I would say yes.
Yes? Chiasm is repeat and enlarge?
Should be. Well, in line, should be.
Brother Theodore?
I'm trying to think of different examples. They can be, but generally they aren't, in the ones that I'm thinking of. What they're meant to do, they do give extra information by the fact that they're a chiasm. So I'm thinking of literary chiasms, like the Song of Solomon's written in a chiasm. I also think of Daniel 9:24, where it talks about the 6 different things that the 70 weeks are determined for: to make an end of sins, to finish transgression, make an end of sins, make a reconciliation for iniquity. Those are all kinds of the same things. And then the last 3, to bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy. Those have similarities attached to them as well. They're a chiasm. They're not telling you the same things. They're telling you something else. So you're grouping 3 together and the other 3 together. And that's understood as a chiasm by most people who look at that. So but they are telling you, they are giving you more information, but I don't think of it as a repeat and enlarge. It's not telling you the same thing necessarily.
So I just want to make sure that...
I'm trying to think of examples. I can think of some in the Psalms where it does things in reverse, but usually when you have the mirror, it's telling you something more. It's telling you that they're the same but different. To me, that's the way I would think of. It ties the first part to the second part, but they're not exactly the same, even though they have a common theme.
And repeat and enlarge, they are exactly the same.
Yeah, they're telling you the same thing with just more information.
Solvi?
But then if the concept of a mirror what should the mirror be reflecting? Or shouldn't it be reflecting anything? Because if I'm using the concept of a mirror and I'm showing you a mirror, why would I be showing you a mirror if I'm going to be showing you Jason? In the concept of how we are using it with the chiastic structure to learn things. So if it is not reflecting that which was presented, but something completely different, what's the purpose of that mirror?
It's not completely different. It's the opposite.
So, what is the purpose of repeat and enlarge?
To expand on what it is that to give you more.
And the chiasm.
That's what I'm saying. A chiasm in my mind is a reflector of
Gives
a
you
mirror.
more. Chiasm gives you more as well, because you're saying they're the same thing. Brother Larry.
In the definition on Wikipedia for chiastic structure, you have it up there where it says present, past, past, present. It says AB should equal BA.
Yep.
And that's what you have. So if you closed present, past, past, present, they would match perfectly together, or like a mirror.
So that would mean they're equal in some structure.
It doesn't say the word equal, but in a sense,
Yeah.
yes.
So this thing is equal to this.
Yeah.
So in some shape or form, it is the same as a repeat and enlarge because you're repeating it.
But
Brother
different-
Mario. But
but it says different variables, so it can have like A, B, B, A. A isn't exactly like B, if that makes any sense.
When I think about this, the chiasm as we're looking at it, what comes to my mind is how the 25-20, as we put it on the board or on the line, how we say we have.
Did everybody hear him? I can't hear you properly.
Can't hear me. All right, I'm saying we have, when we talk about the opening of the 25-20 with Isaiah's prophecy, 19 and 46, and we look at the Millerite history, and we see a 19 and a 46, and we come to the end of the Millerite history, the prophecy opens with a 19 and a 46, and it closes with a 46 and a 19, but you still have those 19 and 46 elements in them. So that's what comes to my mind if I think about a chiastic structure and we're dealing with, let's say, a prophecy like the 25-20, and we're going and we break the line and we show that you had a 19 and a 46 here at the opening of this prophetic line, and then we come down to the end of this prophetic line and we show a 19 and a 46. If I'm making
And the conclusion of that?
You're seeing.
Is a chiastic structure equal or is it different? That's what I'm asking, and you just told me about 46 and 46, which we all know.
In my mind, it's equal, but with different, slightly different information.
Brother James?
I have something else to say about the paragraph still, but I don't think we're back to that yet.
No, not yet. We can't hear you.
I said I have something to comment about the paragraph, but we're not back there yet.
Is this the chiasm or not?
It looks like
Okay, so
it
is
says
it?
you have doesn't equal there.
Take all of that out. Is a chiasm the same as repeat and enlarge? just like a variant of repeat and enlarge?
I think lots of times they are. I don't know that every time they can be. I can't think of a lot of different ones in my mind right now, but the ones I can think of are very similar.
So it can be. So a chiasm is a repeat and enlarge, but it has certain characteristics about it, which gives this pattern. And in that sense, it would be a repeat and enlarge, but it has often some unique characteristics about it, which isn't exactly the same as you'd have in this standard repeat and enlarge. So you couldn't just get that and drop it down here, because the past would be over here then. So you'd have to be careful of how you do that. You can't just drop things. So, Brother Daniel.
I like the 7 and -7. You are repeating the number 7, but you have the additional minus there. So when you repeat something here in the beginning, in the end, God illustrates the end from the beginning. So what is in the end is also what is in the beginning. So yeah, I think it's the same thing, the chiasm from repeat and enlarge, because you have additional history. I think it's illustrating the end, but you have additional information. So I think it repeats, and it's also.
And also, you should also
yes. It's repeat and enlarge, and it's a chiasm.
Okay, Brother Bob.
I don't know if I've heard people talk about it yet, but when I think of a chiasm, there has to a chiastic structure not only begs you to look at how it inverted or chiastic on itself, but it also begs the point to look at the center where it folds on itself. It brings, in my mind, it brings some emphasis on where it hinges. So it brings you to that midpoint.
Okay, so let me ask you a question then. (1946, 46, 19, 1863, and 742. What's the midpoint?
On that one? Okay, because there's two of them that are overlapping, so I guess there isn't one. I'm painting myself in a corner.
Sorry.
Point taken.
It works most of the time, but sometimes
it doesn't.
Like in that one, which is a major one that we don't even have a midpoint, really.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
this kind of like nebulous idea that we have this imaginary fold line and you can fold it, but I've never seen anybody go into that and tell us what the date is, and it might be, but that was one that came directly to my mind. So I'm going to say, in summary, so that we all together on this, that repeat and enlarge, that's just a repeat. To enlarge upon it, you have to give additional information. A chiasm, or a chiastic structure, is a form of repeat and enlarge, but it's a unique form. It structures this repeat and enlarge in a slightly different way, and it's the subtleties of that help you to be able to draw out more information, or it points to something specific. So if we can agree on that it is a repeat and enlarge, but it may have some unusual characteristics about it. And one of the things is that whatever is attached to the chiasm, because the chiasm is being formed by this statement, present, past, past, present, that isn't actually your target. That's not what you're really dealing with. It's the things that are attached to it.
Yep.
We can see that. Okay, Brother James.
We're back to
the passage.
Okay. So again, why I think it's important movements and experience of the church and not movement as some might think that it may be. The sentence here says, the important movements of the present. So God doesn't have multiple movements going on at one time. In the Millerite movement, there wasn't multiple movements, there was one. In the time of Christ, there wasn't multiple movements, there was one. In our time, there's not multiple. God doesn't have multiple movements, there's one. And so that doesn't seem to be pointing to a movement as the beginning of a church, you know what I'm talking about? So I think it's the important things that are going on, the important movements that are going on.
Okay, so important movements, got that bit.
And the experiences of the church, the experience of the church. Again, it's important things that are going on.
So you're saying the movements and the experience is the same? Tell us what you're saying. I'm not sure what you're saying.
Yes, I think that's what's being repeated and enlarged. The important movements and the experience of the church.
Okay, so you tell me what the movement is.
An important movement?
No, in this context, what would a movement be, or the movements? What is that talking about?
Things that happen within the church.
So,
or surrounding the church.
Surrounding doesn't mean in.
Right.
So you're saying it could be either.
It could be like the captivity of Babylonian captivity. That's an experience of the church, and it's an important movement.
So what would the movements be? Because it says the important movements of the present. In the present, we've got multiple movements going on. Because that's the point that you're
Right.
bringing up.
Right.
So movements equals what?
In her time.
No, this is generic. I disagreed with Sister on this when she was trying to do all of those dates, because this is just a generic statement. She'll come to specify, later on perhaps, what she's going to do with it. But this is a general opening statement that talks about whatever's happening in one history has happened before. It's a generic statement. But it says age to age.
And captivity isn't fall into that category?
I don't mind. I'm not trying to define it. I'm just saying it's not specific. So how you seeing the movements in the present?
The diluting of the doctrine that we have.
I don't want to put this like the diluting of the doctrines. It's not that I don't want to put it down. I don't understand how that's working. It seems to me you're saying the movement is the experience.
Yes.
That's what you want. That's what you want to say.
Yes.
You're saying the movement equals the experience.
Yes.
And this is of the church. So therefore, this would be of the church.
That's what I'm saying. The paragraph is saying.
You're saying the things that the church does is the experience of the church.
Experiences. Yeah, experience of the church. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't come to us and say it says movements with an S and then experience in the singular. You just change experience into experiences.
The experiences is as a whole. Experience as a whole. The movements as a whole. Multiple things.
So if it had said movement, would you come to a totally different understanding? If it said movement and experiences, if the S's had swapped. The reason I ask this because it seems to me, if you're saying these are equal, that if someone does something, it produces an experience. It would seem to me a cause and effect between movement and experience, as opposed to synonyms. But I'm not saying I'm right, but that's what I was thinking when I saw this, a cause and effect.
What you just said. I was just going to say what you just said. So important movements today are like the waymarks that we've been traveling through.
And who's creating those waymarks? I don't mean like Satan or God. I mean, who's creating those waymarks?
You mean like who's picking them out of the blue, or
no?
This message.
No, this message isn't doing that. Okay, who created time of the end? It was not a church. Go back to the time of Christ. Who creates the time of Christ, that waymark, time of the end? It wasn't the leaders. They didn't create that, did they?
No.
Who created that?
I don't know.
Some external agency. Mm-hmm. Someone foisted themselves into planet Earth, God, in that situation. He says, I'm going to do something. I'm going to cause something to happen. And okay, I don't want to say too much. I don't tell you what I think. I want to know what you think.
Right. So what I was saying was the important movements are the things that are happening currently.
Okay.
And
so
like
give me
you
an
said,
example of what things are happening.
The former rain being poured out, the latter rain being poured out. Those would be important events. Revelation, the angel of Revelation coming down would be an important.
Rain is not an event.
It's not an event?
Is it? I don't think it is. Okay. Unless you tell me how rain is an event.
Well, a thunderstorm is an event.
Okay, I'm saying rain is a message.
Right.
And I'm saying the message is, did you check in the newspaper today that Russia and America had a fight? That to me would be something, and the rain would be a message about that thing. It wouldn't be the thing itself.
Right. Well, I wouldn't want to say that. I think what the context of the paragraph is talking about is to do with the church. So I don't know if I could just say that any random thing on the news would be an important event, but I mean, we know that some of them are. But if it has to do with what the church is talking about, or God's church, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But like you said, the experiences that they went through.
It's just that if you say cause and effect, you're saying you do the cause and you have the effect. That's how you're understanding that. Anyone else? I don't want to do that. Sister Rodman.
Go ahead.
Sorry?
What's the question?
Oh, the movements and the movements, and how are you reading this passage?
I read it like it's written right up there.
Here.
Present, past, it's a movement, past, present.
Okay,
church.
so is the movement the church?
That middle point between those two, I would put an equal sign, but maybe I'm wrong.
Here?
Yeah.
So the movement is the church?
Religious movement.
Sister, listen.
But then which church? Because the Reformation, the movement that was the Reformation during the Dark Ages, wasn't the Catholic Church. It produced the Lutheran Church, just as the Millerite movement, the Advent movement, produced the SDA Church, but it wasn't the Protestant Church. So I don't know how they can be equal.
Okay.
Experience of the church, I think we can lay out that in a line. Like, you have a disappointment, you have empowerment of the message. I think that's the experience of the church. And these waymarks, which is the experience of the church, we could parallel with the movements of the present. Because if we say this movement is a reform movement, I don't know if Ellen White has any reform movement during this time she's living. You know, like, oh, there is a movement here and this movement is going to be repeated. I don't think that's what she's talking about. I think she's talking about events, movement as experience of the church, the way Marx. I would say that.
Okay, so we've run out of time, so I'll tell you what I think. Have a think about this, then we'll close. That the prophecy was seen to be historical events upon a line, figurative delineation of events. So what I'm understanding or seeing is the movements are external events or history, and these external events produce an experience in the church. And these external events are 1989, 9/11, all those things which are existential, nothing to do with us. We have no control over them. They're just happening in some ad hoc fashion. They just come whenever they come in. And these events, or these movements, in the plural, because there's lots of them, they produce an experience in the church. And the experience they produce is Reformation, if you want to go with that. So that's how I was understanding that. And if that was the case, then the movements wouldn't be this. The movements, so that picture wouldn't be complete then. It would be the movements in the world would produce experiences in the church. If we were going to sort of fit it. But those words aren't in that passage, which is why I didn't put them in there. So have a think about it. And we'll, if you get a chance, in fact, if you do think about it, you'll dream about it tonight. You'll dream about it tonight, and when you dream, you'll reorder it, and it'll be help to fix in your memory in the morning. So, pretty sure we've got a chiasm. Chiasm is teaching us something. Chiasms are a form of repeat and enlarge. They have some subtle, unique properties about them, and in most chiasms, it depends on how sophisticated or complicated they are. And a simple one like this, it's this bit here, the top above, that's above the line, the present, past, present, isn't really teaching us anything. It's just creating a structure on the thing that's more important, which is the movements and the experience. And I think what is being portrayed here, because of the movements in the plural, and we don't have multiple movements in any one dispensation, is that the events in the world are creating the experience in the church. And I know some people already said that. I think Brother Daniel and Sister Andrea was suggesting that already, and not everybody agrees. So have a think about that, and we'll see what conclusion we come to tomorrow. Heavenly Father, we want to give you praise and thanks for your watch care over us as we try to understand in a more systematic fashion what this introductory passage is dealing with in one of the most important chapters in the Great Controversy. We want to ask that you would guide us and direct us so that we might have a clearer understanding of your word. We ask and pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.